Okay, I have covered this one in the other video, but I want to be more specific, and this video is just for this particular subject, and that is the jingoistic attitude the Chinese government is taking in some of its rhetoric of late. Um, so basically, they are furious because Donald Trump uh, called the COVID-19 pandemic the Chinese virus. Now, I'm not a fan of Trump. I do think the man lacks diplomacy. I think he lacks grace. And I think that's crude. I think he should use the formal term COVID-19 or the coronavirus. However, calling it the Chinese virus, whilst blunt, whilst crude, whilst perhaps a bit flippant, isn't actually factually wrong. How can it be racist if it's just based on a fact? The virus began in China, hence using the demonym Chinese virus is not wrong. I think it would be racist if it was just blaming it on the Chinese without any evidence, i.e., oh, well, this pandemic began, we don't know where it was sourced, let's just blame the Chinese. But we know where it was sourced, we know it began in Wuhan. So, undiplomatic, yes. Crude, yes. Racist, no. What is racist is the abuse of ordinary East Asians has unfortunately been happening in Europe and perhaps elsewhere. That's wrong. There's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for ordinary Chinese or people who are of East Asian appearance to be subjects of racist abuse. Period. That's wrong. Um, but I'm growing increasingly I wouldn't say angry because it is what it is. It's all I expect from the Chinese regime. But yeah, not happy with their attitude. I mean, let's look at the facts. When this broke out, their initial response was to censor it and to try and punish the doctors such as Dr. Li Wenliang as rumor mongers, as just troublemakers, spreading rumors. Um, that was in late 2019 when they realized it was a serious problem. Then they changed their tune, they started taking it seriously. And the mantra from Chinese society, whilst there was some initial anger over the death of Dr. Li, now the attitude has changed to, oh, our wonderful government's looking after us. I think this is kind of a Confucianism thing. That is to say, many Chinese sort of see the government as like their parents. They will, um, and they see themselves almost like, I use these terms very loosely, but this is honestly the perception that I get from the way people describe this. I have had Chinese people say this to me that the government's like a parent. We may not always like what they do, but we don't question it. Unfortunately, that is a prevailing mentality because what's happening now is they're in overdrive with their propaganda to show how wonderful they are, and look how efficiently we've handled it. The thing is, they have probably done some practical things. Um, I think some of the quarantine methods, I can't criticize that. That's a practical move. But nothing changes the fact that they initially tried to cover it up. And common sense dictates that with that initial cover up, it would have allowed the virus to spread. Because if you don't have the information and you don't have a free media that can report this, and you are not giving scientists and doctors the leeway to do their work without accusing them of spreading rumors, that is going to exacerbate the problem. And how has the Chinese regime responded in recent weeks? They have expelled Western journalists, particularly American journalists from the Washington Post and New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. For what reason, who knows? Um, because the Chinese regime doesn't like outsiders scrutinizing it. They have no domestic scrutiny because the Chinese media is entirely controlled by the Communist Party. so they could just put out all their positive propaganda. Oh, look how wonderfully we're handling this. On top of that, they're promoting jingoistic conspiracy theories about how this was supposedly an American military plot. The notion is that I believe it was the Asian military games last year, I forget the formal name, but there was supposedly an exercise in Wuhan which American personnel took part in, and oh well, they use that to plot this biological war against China and make China look bad. But like I said in the previous video, how would that benefit America? Sure, it would humiliate China by making it look like a virus began in China, but the point is the rest of the world is suffering anyway, including the United States. So it would kind of be an own goal in that sense. Um, Particularly knowing how the Chinese government will try to blame them anyway, it just doesn't make sense. As a covert operation, it has many flaws. But the point is, it has no basis in fact, and the Chinese regime is promoting this to the point where the Chinese ambassador was summoned to Washington this week to be reprimanded by Pompeo's staff for this, and rightly so. I think we should follow suit. If they try to scapegoat the UK on our approach to this, we should follow suit, summon the Chinese ambassador. Um, I am not saying now is the time to be demanding reparations from China or anything like that. I don't think that is even going to work. But what we certainly shouldn't be doing is taking any guilt trips from the Chinese regime, who I think what they're doing is they're capitalizing on the fact there has been unfortunately some racist incidents, and they're kind of using that to their advantage to say that Western governments are encouraging it. But on the contrary, we take racism very seriously. If someone's convicted of a racial hate crime, that's a very serious offence, certainly in the UK. So I'm not disputing that that has happened, but what I'm saying is the Chinese communist dictatorship is extremely jingoistic. I mean, whenever there's a problem in China, they always find a way to try and turn it on America every single time. Everything's the fault of America, according to the Chinese regime. This is a party that hates losing face. The only thing they're interested in is power and control. So they always have to scapegoat outsiders when they've messed up. And they did mess up because they tried to cover it up. Like I say, whatever positive things they have done since does not change that fact. So they, at the very least, could come clean and say we were wrong to do that. But they're never going to do that because it would mean getting into the deeper issues of how they control China. So, summed up, I think I can understand ordinary Chinese not liking, like, not wanting to feel that they are personally being scapegoated. But, if I was Chinese and someone kind of treated me differently, I wouldn't like it. I'm not talking about ordinary Chinese feeling that way. However, I would say ordinary Chinese who are defending their government should expect a sharp rebuke, and they should expect people to argue that point because the facts speak for themselves. And the facts are the Chinese government tried to hide it. They have tried to push conspiracy theories with no basis of fact. They've expelled Western journalists. They've done. So they really are in no position to play the victim and to shout about racism. They're jingoistic. The Chinese government is extremely jingoistic. The way they treat foreigners at times is abhorrent. The way the Chinese government treats foreigners in China, it's far worse than the way any Chinese is treated in the West. So I've no, I really have no respect for their attitude. It's not surprising. I'm not at all surprised by it, but I just think it's a reminder of why we need to be assertive in dealing with this government. So, yeah, I'm not saying that Trump is right to call it the Chinese virus. I think that's a bit undiplomatic. I don't think it's particularly helpful at this time. However, it isn't factually wrong. The virus did begin in China, and I don't think the Democrats should be focusing on Trump's response to China. I think they should be focusing on Trump's response within the United States, which has been lackluster. It's not been great. That's legitimate. But I really do believe there needs to be a united front from Western governments internally as well over our attitude to China. And it's just been too much pandering. It's one of the very few things I think the Trump administration has been broadly correct on. They have taken a more hardline approach to China overall. I think that's right. I'm not talking about every aspect of the trade war, but tougher rhetoric I do support because for too damn long the West has been too sensitive regarding China. We've frankly been walking on eggshells because we don't want to offend Beijing. Those days have to end. Beijing's been pushing its way around for too long. They've been hiding behind the century of humiliation to say, oh, well, that's how we were treated in the past, so we're going to throw our weight around now. And the Westerners can't complain about it. No, every country is sovereign, so we need to stand up for ourselves as well. And I think we've ceded way too much ground to Chinese sensitivities. Way too much ground. It's not racist to stand up to an authoritarian regime that hides facts from its own people, that pushes jingoism, um, that has, at least in large part, been culpable for the spread of a worldwide pandemic. The rest of the world is paying for the Chinese government's initial response to this. Whilst I don't blame them for the entire pandemic, I think every individual government should be judged on its own actions. And I think that there are other strains that have nothing to do with, for example, there were cases in California with people who had no contact with China. So I'm not saying the Chinese government is to blame for the entire thing. Pandemics happen, and they can happen anywhere in the world. However, I do think the response matters. And the propaganda they're putting out on Chinese social media right now is we're great. Look at how well we've handled it. We're the heroes, and look at those awful Americans trying to blame us. But the reality is they try to cover it up.